special slavery.
Who was he slaving?
200 years after Britain abolished slavery.
There's no slaves there.
It's back.
You were literally made to work and punished, almost like an open concentration camp.
In the UK, 13,000 are said to be trapped in this hidden underworld.
Mình xuất phát từ Việt Nam nhưng mà mình không nhớ chính xác.
The Prime Minister, Theresa May, has described slavery as a barbaric evil, and the numbers continue to rise.
This is organised crime on a scale the world hasn't seen before.
For the past 2 years, we've had unique access to two of Britain's biggest slavery cases.
You quite often beat them.
No good.
They said that if you try, they will get to murder you.
This is the story of Britain's modern-day slaves.
I tell people that it's going on within 10 miles of where they're sat, regardless of where they are in the country. It's that widespread.
The wealthy, genteel town of Cheltenham in the Cotswolds. An unlikely place you would think to find slavery. But in recent years, this well-heeled town has been the centre of a major slavery investigation. It all began in 2008, with a grisly discovery at the bottom of a garden.
My son came across this, what he thought was a football, and he kicked it with his foot to turn it over, and then he found that there were teeth in it, so it wasn't a ball at all, and it was actually a human head.
The skeleton had lain in the undergrowth for 3 years. Its discovery would expose a world of slavery and horror that most people thought had disappeared 2 centuries previously.
It was just skeletal remains, and we had to have DNA abstracted from the bones, and then there was a process of DNA profiling which enabled us to identify Christopher.
The remains belonged to Christopher Nichols, a father of 2 from Bristol. He disappeared in 2002 when he was 37.
He said to us, "I found a new job, Dad." He said, "I'm going to work for this lady up in Gloucester to help her as a handyman." He seemed quite happy about it, so we said, "Oh, fine, keep in touch with us." That was the last I seen of him.
Through the bridge there is the house and the garden where Christopher's remains were found. And we were able to establish, once we'd identified him by his DNA, that this place was the last address that he'd lived at. We came to the premises here and spoke to the occupants, who we found to be William and Breda Connors.
William Connors, known as Billy, his wife Breda and their children, are an Irish traveller family. They own travellers' sites in Gloucestershire and other counties. From their homes, they ran their family business, block paving driveways and patios. Unusually, their workers lived with them. At one point, that included Christopher Nichols.
Their tale to us at that time was that in 2005, he left of his own volition. He just chose to leave and he went off and they didn't see him again.
Our inquiries continued, and we were able to identify a friend of Christopher who it turned out had been recruited by the Connors with him. And he told a very, very different story.
The friend's account was backed up by another man, John, who was held by the Connors for 13 years. He's asked us to hide his identity for fear of reprisals.
I went to somewhere which was almost like an open concentration camp, where you were literally made to work and punished, on a regular basis. I couldn't see any means of getting away or escaping even.
Christopher was the Connors' main salesman, responsible for bringing in the lucrative block paving jobs.
If they didn't get any work for the Connors, then often they were subject to violence, and that was typical of the way that Billy Connors would behave.
His actions could be quite extreme. Chris, he'd been beaten with a metal tow bar, which really hurt him badly. I heard the cries We were all told to stay in our trailers while this was going on.
Christopher did try to escape the Connors' clutches. Selwood's inquiries took him back to what was, at that time, Billy and Breeder's home.
He left the premises in the middle of the night and, for some reason, stepped out into the road and been hit by a passing vehicle and sustained very serious injuries, which resulted in him being hospitalised.
Christopher's hospital stay was abruptly cut short when Billy Connors and his worker John paid him a visit.
Chris looked absolutely terrified. But when we seen him, he looked very poorly, he was very bruised, not well at all, and can't get out of the bed. But the object of the visit apparently was to get him from there and take him back to the site where he would be put back to work. I couldn't believe that was really taking place. I was convinced that my boss was a psycho, totally inhuman.
Christopher returned to Billy and Breeder, but the accident had left him incontinent and unable to work. 4 months later, he disappeared. It would be the last anyone would see of him.
We were just told that he'd gone. They'd moved off. 1 minute he was there, the next minute he was gone.
What had begun as a case of unidentified human remains was now overshadowed by alarming tales of slave-like conditions at Billy Connors' sites. So Detective Superintendent Selwood decided to put the Connors under surveillance.
And very quickly, almost every day we did surveillance, we saw workers leaving one or other of Billy's sites, going off to work on driveways. They worked in all weathers. That winter was a particularly cold winter with snow on the ground. They'd clear the snow and they'd carry on block paving and digging. They worked from dawn till dusk.
Billy and Breeder drove their workers around the clock, 19 hours a day, 6 days a week, for as little as £5 or no pay at all. The men were given so little to eat, they were reduced to scavenging for food in dustbins. And there was more. Graphic evidence of Billy Connors' brutal treatment of his workers.
We captured a number of assaults, and these images show Billy Connors here kicking and here punching a 17-year-old worker on his site at Beggar's Roost. This image is the youth in tears afterwards. One of the workers we established was more or less a personal slave for Billy and Breeder.
I've seen him hit about with a broom until his head has bled. I've seen him, all his clothes removed and him hosed in cold water in the middle of winter. Really awful.
The police did not want to rely on the testimony of vulnerable men to prosecute the Connors. Luckily for Selwood, new anti-slavery legislation was about to come into force, the first for 200 years. Now he would need proof that the Connors had gotten rich off the backs of their workers.
Alongside our covert investigation, we ran a financial investigation. We identified assets that we say were valued at over £2.5 million. We identified bank accounts with nearly £600,000 on deposit. We identified they had a luxurious lifestyle. Their caravans and their homes were luxurious. They always drove top-of-the-range vehicles. They went on expensive holidays. We had evidence of them going for cruises on the Queen Mary, exotic holidays in America and in Europe, and they lived a very high life.
With new slavery legislation in place, Selwood was ready to act. On the 22nd of March 2011, he made his move. 150 police officers swooped on 3 sites belonging to Billy and Breda Connors. The couple were arrested, along with their 2 sons and son-in-law, Miles.
You are making people work in conditions that amount to slavery. That's the reason you're being arrested.
My life, my whole life. Slavery! My husband, slavery! I cannot believe what he's getting arrested for, love. What, for who? Who's the slavery?
Will I come in? Is that all right?
Yeah, no problem.
16 men were rescued. One of them was John. He'd been enslaved by the Connors for 13 years.
I remember a knock on the door. The constable there, lady constable was there. She said, I want you to get your things together. You come outside. And yeah, Elysian, I think.
The 16 rescued men were taken away to a safe house in Cheltenham. One man had been held by Billy and Breda Connors for more than 30 years.
These workers were slaves. They were under our noses to a degree. This has been going on for decades in Gloucestershire. We were completely oblivious to it. These people had just disappeared. They didn't exist, and the Connors were able to exploit them.
For decades, the Connors family had scoured towns and resorts across the UK looking for potential slaves. The South Coast was a favourite hunting ground for picking up vulnerable British men. September 2009, Bournemouth. Mark Ovenden had just lost his job, and he was struggling to make ends meet.
I experienced some hardship. I started to feel very depressed. I withdrew myself. I isolated myself. I was living in a house that was due to be sold. Lost a job. I was on the very edge of destitution.
But Mark's situation was about to take a turn for the worse.
It was an evening in late September 2009, and I was just heading up to the soup kitchen here. There's a guy parked outside on this corner with, he was in a fairly nice car. He had his wife and his kid with him. And he asked me if I was looking for a job, said he could throw in accommodation, 3 meals a day, and I thought, why not? And so I went with him there and then.
Mark had been picked up by another member of the Connors family. He was driven to a traveller's site called Green Acres, on the outskirts of the market town of Leighton Buzzard. This site belongs to Tommy Connors, a cousin of Billy and Breda.
It wasn't until the next day that I noticed that anything was particularly wrong. The other workers at the site were living in a horse box. It would have been about 8 living in a horse box, which had kind of wooden bunks built into the side of it. You've seen the pictures of kind of the concentration camps, the long tunnel-like barracks, and it looked exactly like that inside.
It wasn't just the living conditions that troubled him, but the inmates themselves.
People would have their heads shaved. Everybody at the site had a shaved head.
This ritual was carried out by one of the other long-serving workers.
I've done it, and I had to do it to people. Cut their hair, do you come the bully?
As part of the initiation, the new recruits' own clothes would be taken away.
They nose you down, breathe and cold water.
Any documents, any mobile phones, anything like that, anything valuable would be taken away. When I was first picked up, my house keys and my mobile phone disappeared.
They took all your ID and everything to know that you didn't exist.
There was one outside tap for the workers to use, cold water only, and this is approaching winter now, so it's not ideal at all. Most of them hadn't showered or cleaned themselves for a couple of months at least. There was kind of a small outside toilet that didn't work.
You had to go over the wall to have a casa, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? You don't wipe your ass.
So this is Green Acres.
It's an odd feeling to be back here. I spent what was the worst period of my life here. I was definitely kept a prisoner. There weren't any locked gates or bars or anything like that, but it was made very, very clear that if I was to go out, if I was to try to leave, then the consequences would be pretty grave. I've seen Tommy Senior punch people, kick people, push people around, threaten people's lives frequently.
I was assaulted many a time, or hit with something, or kicked. He said, if you ever escape the lot, we'll find you. We'll find you, kill you, and he could have buried you at the back of the fields. So was it worth escaping?
You don't really see escape as an option. You know that wherever you go, you're going to be found. Here, I'm some 120, 130 miles from home. Didn't have any money in my pocket. Didn't have any reason to suspect that the authorities would take me seriously if I went to them. So where was I going to go? I'd leave here and have to walk any number of miles in any direction. I'm going to be fairly easy to pick up again.
In July 2011, 2 workers did manage to escape while out canvassing for work and went to the police.
I went canvassing all day. I didn't get one customer. And, he punched me in the eye as hard as he could. He goes, you're useless. And just punched me in the eye and put me in the boot of the car. And it was all dark in there and all covered. It's not very nice going in the boot.
He told us of incidents of beatings and mistreatment. People were being starved, and that if anybody did try to escape, they would be beaten and even killed.
They said if you try and leave, we'll get to murder you.
And he then says that there's another man in the area doing the same, who's been held against his will for over 7 years. When the police found him, he said, "No, everything's fine."
The Connors are my best friends now. They're like my parents. I've enjoyed life for the last 7 years. I'm off the alcohol, thanks to them.
We've had some information to suggest that you're beaten regularly.
Not really. A few slaps.
Why would anyone? Why would anyone slap you?
Maybe I deserve it.
Why would you deserve it?
I don't know. Maybe I do deserve it.
So they had 2 different accounts. And this is what we knew we would face throughout the investigation. People that would say, yeah, everything was fine, because they're that vulnerable. There was no barbed wire, there was no fencing, there was no need, because they were all brainwashed.
Anyway, 7 years of my life has been fantastic.
In September 2011, 200 police officers descended on the Connors site at Greenacres.
You see 2 caravans in a van.
And uncovered a world of squalor and horror.
Access to the site.
You had these poor people in pitiful dress, thin, pale, teeth missing, filthy, dirty, heads down, broken men.
The only clothing they had was what they were wearing. Some had scurvy. One guy was covered from head to foot in his own excrement. It was the most dire, disgusting place you could ever wish to live in.
They had to have the travellers' cats and kittens living in there with them. Cats were urinating and defecating in there, and they had to live in there. And you see the poo on the floor, and you see that they're living amongst that. It's just horrific, really.
These conditions were in stark contrast to the Connors' homes, just a few meters away.
People would refer to it as palatial. Really nice kitchens, sparkling clean, often unused, with crystal in the ovens to show how clean and tidy it was. Luxury everywhere.
When we searched the caravans, there was a stacking like steamer set cash in the bottom part of the pan, and there was a baby bag stuffed with money, lots of ready cash lying around. We're talking thousands in a pot. We're not talking a few pennies or 100 quid or so.
By the end of the raid, officers had rescued 22 men.
That was one of the greatest days of my life. It was. The world just stopped. It went, and the air smells different. That's how good it was.
But for others, freedom after years of mental imprisonment was not welcome.
Some people still refuse to leave.
This man had been with the Connors for 20 years.
They reckon I was a slave, yeah.
So, do they question you about your involvement here?
They tried to question me, but I told them that I'm not going into an interview.
There's no slaves there. If there were slaves, they would go. People go and come when they want. There's no slaves there.
5 members of Tommy Connor's family were arrested and charged with slavery.
Did you ever offer any violence to them? Did you beat them? Or
No
kick
comment.
them? Or injure them in any way?
No comment.
Anything that you want to comment on at all, Patrick?
What I'm doing in this police station, work hard for a living, don't do anything wrong. It's just another thing to get back at our family again.
But what do you work hard doing for a living?
The interview's over now, I just concluded what I have to say, that's it. No comment.
These are human beings that have to live in that.
They should tidy it then, shouldn't they?
Wow. Did you not tell them to?
I can't force people to do things.
You force them to go out and work for you.
I didn't force them.
4 members of Tommy Connor's family were convicted of slavery and sentenced to a total of 28 years in prison. Billy and Breda Connors and 3 of their family were jailed for nearly 19 years in total. They were also ordered to pay £2.25 million immediately.
When you see him in the handcuffs, with the head bowed down, guilt, and you knew my time has come.
For the family of Christopher Nichols, whose skeletal remains sparked the initial investigation, there is no closure. The police were unable to find any evidence to link his death to Billy Connors.
Billy Connors said he'd given him £50 and sent him on his way. Well, my own view is that Christopher was no longer of any use to Billy Connors because of the physical injuries that he'd sustained, and Billy threw him out to fend for himself, and I think Christopher would have had the clothes he stood up in.
There was people that he'd taken in, and if he couldn't use them any longer, perhaps they were gone past the sell-by date where work was concerned, they would be fly tipped, basically taken to any part of the country and just dumped there.
We do have his children, and it's very sad, really, that they've had to suffer in such a way. We don't believe that we'll get justice for the death of Christopher.
The cause of Christopher's death remains a mystery. But without it, many of his co-workers would never have gained their freedom.
What would you say to Chris if he was still here?
I'd probably put my arms around him and I'd hug him. I can't thank him enough, really. Thank you.
Four members of Tommy Connor's family may be behind bars, but for many of their victims, the fear remains. It's been 6 years since Mark Ovenden escaped from their clutches, but he still doesn't feel safe.
I went into the centre of town one day and I was about to cross a road. I was standing at a pedestrian crossing and a white transit van pulled up next to me. And there was a red-headed guy who sat in the driver's seat, and I panicked and ran off. I still couldn't shake the feeling that anything could happen at any point.
What happened to the Connors victims is not an isolated case. Every day in the UK, people are being targeted by slave drivers.
This is very much the tip of the iceberg. This isn't a traveller crime. This is something that's happening everywhere in the UK.
In 21st century Britain, slavery has taken root in every town and city. In June 2016, the High Court found that a subcontractor used slaves to catch chickens for a leading supplier of eggs to high street stores, unbeknown to the supplier or retailer. Lately, Britain's nail bar industry has come under scrutiny.
We've seen a massive growth in the last 2 years of nail bars popping up and down the high street. You can get your nails done for £10, but you can only pay in cash. The person that's doing your nails can't speak any English. And often what we're beginning to find is that they're held there against their will, they're in forced labour situation, and they're often in bonded debt to their slave masters. So the question is, who's doing your nails? Are your nails being done by slaves?
Many nail salons are staffed by trafficked Vietnamese who are being lured here with the promise of well-paid jobs. A favourite destination is Scotland. The police here now carry out spot checks on nail bars across the country. This customer is bemused by the sudden police presence.
Do you come here often?
I've been here a couple of times.
Yeah. Do your friends come here as well?
Yeah.
Any concerns?
I think we get it done.
Yeah. Change over the staff?
A wee bit, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I've had a few different people there coming in.
Yeah, okay. All right. I've got officers outside. Do you mind if we just have a quick chat with you, just very, very briefly? Okay, thank you.
One of the team has spotted a new worker in the corner of the shop who has raised his suspicions.
Nice to meet you. We're just going to go into this office and I just want to have a very brief chat with you.
Hi, how you doing? How's things? How did you arrive here? What was the journey?
Hành trình đi từ đâu? Mình xuất phát từ Việt Nam nhưng mà mình không nhớ chính xác là đi qua bao nhiêu nước và phải đổi xe bao nhiêu lần, bởi vì đổi xe rất là nhiều lần.
Do you know where you are?
Mình không nhớ rõ đường, không nhớ rõ địa chỉ đâu.
Doesn't remember exactly the address.
No. We could meet people and they don't know that simple question of where they actually are. It's horrendous. They don't speak any English at all, so they have no understanding of what situation they're in or how to get themselves out of that situation. Can you ask him who has his identity card?
Thế cái giấy chứng minh thư nhân dân của anh thì ai cầm?
Không, mình cũng không có. Ngay từ khi sinh ra mình không có.
I never have any identity card.
Did you get paid enough?
Có.
Yes.
Mọi người ở đây thứ nhất là mình đến đây vừa học vừa làm này, nhưng mà vẫn có lương. Thứ hai là người ta còn cho mình ăn ở đây, rất là thoải mái.
Can you ask him if he owes any money?
Có nhưng mà không nhiều, mình không cần.
Not much.
Not much. How much?
Khoảng mấy chục gì đấy thôi.
Okay. You say to him
The boy is just 16. He's worried that he's said too much and he's going to be deported.
Nhưng mình sẽ được ở đây và làm việc, sống ở đây tiếp, thay đổi một cái gì cuộc sống mình cảm thấy rất là hài lòng.
The boy was taken to a place of safety. Scottish police tracked down the owner of the nail bar to a London suburb, 420 miles away. In September, he was convicted of trafficking offences and was sentenced to 12 months in prison. The plight of migrant workers of all nationalities is echoed in towns in rural areas across Britain. 3 a.m., Cambridgeshire. 300 crime officers are about to raid properties in Wisbech. They're targeting illegal gang masters who exploit migrants desperate for work.
Come on, get in there! Come on, please!
Every day before dawn in Wisbech, a modern British ritual plays out. Eastern Europeans gather in the town centre looking for a day's work.
Wisbech as a town has always attracted migrant workers because of the type of work that's available. It's largely agricultural, it's largely hard labour on minimum pay, and the indigenous population's just not been attracted to that type of work.
These are the lucky ones. They're picked up by legal gangmasters. The work is tough, but they're paid the going rate and it's all above board. Across the road, it's a different story. There's a parallel operation with ruthless, illegal gangmasters, exploiting migrants for little or no pay. This is where an Eastern European crime gang picked up its workers. In their raids, crime officers find 80 workers who were taken away to safety.
The harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely for.
They also arrest 9 members of organised crime gangs. Among them, they get one of their targets, Latvian man Ivars Mezels.
Just dress me up.
This was the end of a year-long investigation by Cambridgeshire police, targeting a crime gang led by Mezels and Yuris Valuevs, and including Valuev's wife, Oksana, and her friend Lauma Vankova.
Ivars Mezels was extremely calculating. He was really able to understand vulnerability, to identify those that could be exploited. Okay, so this is the exhibits room. Here we have some adverts which were found at the home addresses, and they're written in Russian and they're translated to workers required to work cabbages, potatoes and flowers. And the 2 telephone numbers there refer to Valuevs and Mezels.
The adverts were placed in shops and on social network sites designed to target Eastern Europeans dreaming of a better life.
Mezels was guaranteeing each individual work. If you come from an area where work isn't available, you don't have good living accommodation, come to me in Wisbech and I'm going to guarantee you good employment, regular employment, above the minimum pay. You're also going to get accommodation, it's going to be good accommodation, and I'm going to look after your interests.
The reality was very different. Workers were crowded into dilapidated homes, for which Mezels charged extortionate rents.
We entered here at 4 o'clock this morning and we found 7 males and 1 female. And when we were let in through the back door, there was 2 males actually asleep, sitting down with the feet up on each of these chairs here. They were just slept there. They had literally only just arrived. They'd been just literally dropped off by someone and said, this is where you're staying, dropped them off and then drove off. First bedroom, you've got damp going all the way along the top, all the way around, and if you look, you can see the discoloration on the wall. Damp all behind the beds, it's coming all the way up, the plaster's actually coming away from the wall. And that's somebody's head, sleeping right next to it, which I wouldn't think is going to be very good for your health. It seems that people have been exploited. It's quite unnerving, really, that this is going on so close to home.
Mezels and the gang sublet 8 such houses, generating around £10,000 a month in rent. But it wasn't enough. He also overcharged for transport to the fields and factories, where migrants would find that the promised work just wasn't there. But they still owed Mezels for their transport and rent, and now they were in his debt.
Over here, we have one of the debt books that we seized from Mezels. It was actually in his car. Now, inside, as an example, you'll see rent, transport and debts recorded within this book. OK, this is a transport column. So there's dates at the top here, and you can see that one person has been charged £8 a day for transport, somebody else is £7. So they're earning very low amounts of money, and if you add up the money that they earned and you take away the rent and you take away the transport and you take away what Mesel says was a debt, they were left with a pittance very often at the end of that. Sometimes pence, sometimes nothing at all, and earning nothing for all of their effort.
During the course of their investigation, Cambridgeshire police discovered that Mesels and the gang ruthlessly exploited their workers for profit.
Once the workers were in debt, basically having no earnings at all, worried about keeping a roof over their head and where their next meal was going to come from, they'd do essentially whatever they were asked to do. They were asked to go with their gang into banks and building societies and told they were going to be opening bank accounts. The gang themselves acted as interpreter and convinced the bank that they were just there to assist their friends and colleagues. When the bank accounts were opened, they went immediately into the control of the gang and were used by the gang to launder money. On one occasion, a young lady we worked with throughout the trial called Santa identified that more than £11,000 had gone through her account. So she confronted ValueFs, and ValueFs essentially told her not to ask questions, and he said that he would finish her off.
The gang singled out female workers for more sinister exploitation.
Women in particular are a very valuable commodity for the gang. They could use them to enter them into sham weddings, or they could push them towards prostitution. They also threatened them with much more serious things, like if you don't pay me back, you can sell an organ, which then made the sham weddings and prostitution sound far less scary. And one of our victims in particular, she was coerced into going to India, where on her return, after marrying somebody in India, was told by the gang, "You're no further use to us, you've cleared your debt," and they evicted her and her children from the house.
Over the course of 2 trials, Mesels and ValueFs were finally convicted. First, they were found guilty of operating as illegal gangmasters.
Don't drop it.
Then in May 2016, all 4 gang members were convicted of conspiracy to acquire criminal property. 3 of the 4 were also jailed for arranging sham marriages. The gang were sentenced to 26 years in prison, but other criminal groups are still working the area. Cambridgeshire police are currently investigating 6 other cases involving labour exploitation. Today, officers are on their way to check on the gang's former workers. Following the police investigation, many found themselves homeless.
We're now en route to an encampment. Initially, when we first met them, they wouldn't tell us who they were working for. Yeah, they are very much afraid of mentioning Ivar's and Urius's name. Very fearful to talk about them for fear of reprisals.
The makeshift camp is situated just yards from a busy main road. The conditions are squalid.
The living area here, undercover, with their chairs. They've got a little table and their drinks. This is the red carpet that leads to the toilet area. It's a bit of a makeshift toilet made out of tyres. Not the most comfortable, but it's out of the way from the main camp.
There are 3 people huddled under a tarpaulin tent that barely protects them from the elements.
Hello? There's no problems. We're just checking that you're okay because it's been a cold night and we just want to check you.
Please, can you leave us alone? We're not touching anyone. Would you please leave us in peace?
They're initially reluctant to talk to the police. They only agreed to speak on the assurance that we would hide their identities.
You, in the past, have told us that you've had problems with people or with money being taken from your pay.
Вы прежде нам сказали, что у вас были проблемы, что деньги
This man worked for another illegal gangmaster.
They told me I had to pay money to them. They were taking £500.
You work for Euros and for EVA's measures?
Никаких проблем не было.
No problems.
Every day I driving cars close Ивара-Юра. Была работа, было все, был машины, каждый день работа была.
Every day we had work.
И дом был, как сказать, хата была, все было.
Everything's right.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Mesel's gang may be in prison, but the workers are still afraid of them.
Word has gotten out that if there's a camera, then you fully support EVARS and URIS. It's just amazing that in 21st century Britain we've got people living in tents. It's outrageous, and there's people profiteering from it and making the vast sums of money whilst other people are left in these conditions. It's words fail me, really.
Every night on the streets of London, as in our other major cities, organised crime gangs target vulnerable men and women for slave labour.
I'm out tonight to warn the homeless that they're at risk of becoming victims of human trafficking. Hi, how are you?
Charity worker Megan Stewart used to be homeless herself. She's made it her mission to spread the word about the trafficking gangs who lie in wait.
The situation on the streets is definitely getting worse than what it's been. The reason traffickers seem to be targeting the homeless at the moment is because obviously it costs money to come in from Europe to the UK. Why bring people in when they're already here at the soup runs? I'm here, yeah, because the free food banks where you guys are accumulating are being targeted by human traffickers. If you could give me the details of any vans or suspicious people, I can work.
A couple of months ago, they took them some couple of the guys somewhere like far.
Yeah.
I haven't seen them.
The traffickers have learned about the soup runs, and they've also learned the rota of the soup runs, where the soup runs are going to be, who's going to be at those soup runs, and they've basically become a candy store for the traffickers. The more vulnerable they are, the more likely they are to be targeted. So if you don't speak any English, if you're looking forlorn or you're a drug addict or alcoholic, that's the type of person that the trafficker's looking for. Someone that's not going to be missed. They go out, they say to them, I was sitting in this queue last week. These guys came along, they offered me work and accommodation. I've not looked back, mate. And they've got a couple of openings. So, you know, the guys, because they're cold, because they're hungry, think, Jesus, great, get in the van, and that's it.
There are takers for these offers. A homeless girl.
A couple got in my car last week.
Who did?
A couple,
Okay.
a lassie and a guy, and they got offered work and accommodation, and they got in the car. But no one cared.
And you've not seen them since? Please be careful. Have you ever been approached yourself?
Aye.
By it?
Aye. We knew it was a scam. We just went, nah, forget it, mate. You know what I mean? We are not interested.
Right.
We know what happens when people go with the likes of you. As I say, end up in a shallow grave somewhere if it's the
Indeed.
worst case scenario. Aye?
Indeed.
It's not just a British problem. The UN says the slave trade is a huge money-making global enterprise.
It's $150 billion a year industry. $150 billion.
Stacey.
This is serious organised crime on a scale the world hasn't seen before. Drugs are massive, huge industry, but you can only sell drugs once. People can get sold over and over and over again.
With With new modern slavery legislation in force, the Prime Minister, Theresa May, has made it her mission to crack down on the slave masters. It's a huge challenge.
People tend to be very comfortable with where they are, and they tend to forget that it doesn't really take much for your life to take a downturn. It doesn't take much for you to lose a home or, lose a job or become depressed or whatever. I just happen to be one of those unlucky people that it happened to. It can happen to anybody at all.
It's just become so commercial, it's become so entrepreneurial, so it's almost starting to embed itself at such a low level that it's become normal, and we have to change attitudes.
However big we think the problem is, I don't think it's naive to think that we can end modern slavery in our lifetime. But it comes down to each and every one of us. So when we go shopping, who made the product? Who's serving us? Who's cleaning our car? Who's doing our nails? Who's tarmacking our drives? And we just need to stop and ask ourselves, do we want to live in a world still built on the back of slavery?